What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I've got 3 airplane stories that will make you think twice about flying. These aren't your typical turbulent scares or delayed flights. These are real accounts from real people who experience things at 30,000 feet that still keep them awake at night. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more horror content just like this. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for story number 3. It's absolutely insane. Let's get into it. This first story comes from a guy named Kings, a 34-year-old software engineer from Portland. Kings travels frequently for work, but this particular flight from Seattle to Boston changed how he views air travel forever. It was a Tuesday night in October 2019. Kings had booked the red-eye to save his company money. You know how it is. Flight 447 was one of those older Boeing 737s, the kind with the cramped seats and flickering overhead lights. The cabin had that stale recycled air smell mixed with industrial carpet cleaner. Kings settled into seat 23C, middle seat, naturally. To his left was an elderly woman reading a romance novel, her reading light casting shadows across her weathered hands. To his right sat a man in his 40s wearing a wrinkled business suit. This man, let's call him the passenger, had been acting strange since boarding. The passenger kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. Not glancing checking, like he was timing something. His left leg bounced constantly, and he gripped a small leather notebook so tight his knuckles had gone white. About 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Midwest, things got weird. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion, and most passengers had settled in to sleep. That's when the passenger started writing in his notebook. But here's the thing, he wasn't just writing. He was copying something. Kings pretended to sleep but kept one eye partially open. The passenger had pulled out what looked like aircraft schematics. Not the safety card from the seat pocket, actual technical drawings with measurements and component labels. He was meticulously copying these diagrams into his notebook, referencing something on his phone screen. The really disturbing part? The passenger was taking photos of the emergency exit mechanisms. Not casual snapshots, detailed, methodical documentation. He photographed the door handles, the window latches, even the floor-level lighting system that guides passengers to exits. Kings felt his stomach drop. This wasn't normal passenger behavior. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. But what could he do? Alert the flight crew based on suspicious note-taking? It wasn't exactly a crime. Around 3 a.m., the passenger got up to use the restroom. Kings saw his opportunity. The notebook was still open on the man's tray table. What Kings saw made his blood run cold. The pages were filled with detailed drawings of the aircraft's interior layout, emergency systems, and what appeared to be timing calculations. But the most chilling part was a series of dates written in red ink. All future dates, all corresponding to flights. When the passenger returned, he immediately noticed Kings looking in his direction. Their eyes met for just a moment, but it was enough. The man's expression shifted from focused concentration to something predatory. He slowly closed the notebook and smiled at Kings. Not a friendly smile, but the kind that makes every instinct in your body scream danger. The rest of the flight, Kings couldn't sleep. Every time he started to drift off, he'd feel the passenger watching him. When they finally landed in Boston, Kings waited until the man left the aircraft before getting up. He reported the incident to airport security, describing everything he'd witnessed. The security officer took down his information but seemed skeptical. "Note-taking isn't illegal, sir," he said. "Did you see anything explicitly threatening?" Kings left the airport feeling frustrated and unsettled. He tried to put the incident behind him, telling himself he'd overreacted. But 3 weeks later, he saw a news report that made his blood freeze. A man matching the passenger's description had been arrested at LAX for attempting to bring prohibited items onto an aircraft. During the investigation, authorities found detailed plans and surveillance notes for multiple flights and airports. The man had been conducting reconnaissance for months, documenting security procedures and aircraft layouts. Kings never found out if Flight 447 had been one of the target flights, but he didn't need to. The knowledge that he'd sat inches away from someone planning something horrific was enough to change him forever. He still flies for work, but now he pays attention to his fellow passengers in ways he never did before. Because sometimes the most dangerous threats don't look like what you'd expect. Before we continue with story number 2, if you're enjoying these real accounts, smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. I post new horror content every day, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. This second story happened to a flight attendant named Stephanie. She's worked for a major airline for over 12 years, and she's seen pretty much everything: medical emergencies, unruly passengers, severe weather. But what happened on Flight 892 from Denver to Miami still gives her nightmares. It was a packed Friday evening flight in July 2021. The 757 was completely full, 184 passengers plus crew. Stephanie was working the aft galley, responsible for the back third of the aircraft. She prided herself on remembering faces, especially on longer flights where she'd interact with passengers multiple times. During the initial boarding, she noticed a woman in seat 34F by the window. The woman stood out because she was traveling alone but had booked the entire row 34D, E, and F. She was maybe 60 years old, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a vintage navy blue dress that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. What made Stephanie remember her wasn't the old-fashioned clothing, though. It was her behavior. The woman never moved, never shifted in her seat, never got up for the restroom, never pressed the call button. For a 6-hour flight, this was unusual enough to notice. About 3 hours in, Stephanie was doing her routine walkthrough when she decided to check on the woman. As she approached row 34, she could see the woman sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead at the seat back in front of her. "Ma'am, can I get you anything? Water? A snack?" Stephanie asked. The woman turned her head slowly, too slowly, like her neck was stiff. When their eyes met, Stephanie felt a chill run down her spine. The woman's eyes were completely white, not cloudy like cataracts, but white like marble. No iris, no pupil, just solid white. "I'm fine, thank you," the woman said in a voice that sounded hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. Stephanie backed away, her training kicking in. She'd dealt with passengers having medical episodes before, but this felt different. She made a mental note to keep checking on the woman and continued her duties. An hour later, during the dinner service, Stephanie returned to row 34. The woman was gone. All 3 seats were empty. No personal items, no blanket, nothing to indicate anyone had been sitting there. Stephanie checked the lavatories, all unoccupied. She walked the entire length of the aircraft twice. The woman had simply vanished. Here's where it gets really disturbing. Stephanie pulled up the passenger manifest on her tablet. According to the airline system, seats 34D, E, and F were listed as unoccupied. No one had booked those seats. No one had checked in for them. But Stephanie distinctly remembered the woman boarding. She remembered her vintage dress, her unnaturally still posture, those white eyes. She even remembered scanning her boarding pass. Stephanie approached her colleague, Joe, who was working the forward galley. "Did you see the woman in 34F during boarding?" Joe looked confused. "What woman? Those seats have been empty the whole flight. The older woman in the navy dress. I just spoke with her a few hours ago." Joe shook his head. "Stephanie, I helped with boarding. Row 34 has been vacant since takeoff." Stephanie felt panic creeping in. She was questioning her own sanity. She decided to check the security cameras, but here's the thing about airline security footage. It's not like a store or office building. There are only cameras in certain areas, and individual passenger seats aren't monitored. For the remainder of the flight, Stephanie couldn't focus on her duties. She kept staring at row 34, half expecting the woman to reappear. When they landed in Miami, she was the first crew member off the aircraft. She reported the incident to her supervisor, who reviewed the passenger manifest and confirmed that seats 34D, E, and F had indeed been unoccupied for the entire flight. The supervisor suggested Stephanie take a few days off, implying she might be experiencing stress-related hallucinations. But Stephanie knew what she'd seen. She'd spoken to that woman. She'd looked into those white eyes. 2 weeks later, Stephanie was working a different route when a passenger stopped her in the aisle. It was an elderly man, probably in his 70s. "Excuse me, miss," he said. "I wanted to ask you about something. On my last flight, there was a woman in an old-fashioned dress. She had white eyes, completely white. Have you ever seen anyone like that?" Stephanie's heart nearly stopped. "When was this?" 3 days ago. Flight 623 from Phoenix to Atlanta. She was sitting in the back, didn't move the entire flight. Then she just wasn't there anymore." Stephanie spent the next few months quietly asking other flight attendants about similar experiences. What she discovered terrified her. At least 6 other crew members had encountered the same woman, always in the back of the aircraft, always in an empty row that shouldn't have been occupied, always vanishing without explanation. The woman in the navy dress wasn't just a one-time occurrence. She was appearing on flights across the country, always in seats that the airline system showed as unoccupied. And every crew member who saw her reported the same detail. Those hollow white eyes that seem to look right through you. Stephanie still works for the airline, but she's requested to never work the aft galley again. She doesn't want to risk another encounter with the woman who shouldn't exist. This final story is the most disturbing of the 3, and it comes from multiple sources: passengers, crew, and even air traffic control recordings. It involves transatlantic flight 1204 from New York to London in September 2022. The flight started normally enough. It was a red-eye departure at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, carrying 298 passengers and 12 crew members aboard an Airbus A330. Among the passengers were Reggie, an investment banker returning from a business trip, and Nicole, a nurse heading to London for a medical conference. About 4 hours into the flight, somewhere over the North Atlantic, things went wrong in a way that defied explanation. It started with the passengers in row 15. A family of 4, mother, father, and 2 young children, suddenly began screaming. Not panic screaming, but genuine terror, like they were seeing something horrific. The flight attendants rushed to their aid, but the family couldn't articulate what was wrong. They just kept pointing at the window and repeating, "It's looking at us. It's looking at us." Nicole, sitting 3 rows behind, had a clear view of the family. She watched as the parents pressed themselves against the aisle side of their seats, as far from the window as possible. The children were crying, covering their eyes with their hands. Here's where multiple passengers corroborate the same impossible detail. There was something outside the aircraft. Not another plane. Not weather phenomena. Something that shouldn't exist at 37,000 feet over the ocean. Reggie was sitting across the aisle with a window seat. He later described seeing what looked like a massive humanoid figure keeping pace with the aircraft. It appeared to be actually walking through the sky alongside the plane. "It was huge," Reggie reported. "Maybe 50 feet tall, moving like it was on solid ground. It had these long arms that seemed to reach toward the windows." Other passengers described similar sightings. A figure in the clouds, moving with the aircraft, appearing to peer into the cabin through the windows. The really disturbing part? The thing seemed to be trying to communicate. Passengers reported seeing it gesture toward the aircraft, pointing at specific windows. Some claimed it appeared to be mouthing words, though obviously no one could hear anything over the engine noise. The flight crew was dealing with increasing panic throughout the cabin. Passengers were refusing to look out the windows. Some demanded to be moved to aisle seats. Others insisted the plane needed to land immediately. Captain Weaver, a 20-year veteran pilot, made the decision to contact air traffic control. The recorded conversation is available through Freedom of Information Act requests, and it's chilling. Gander Control, Transatlantic 1204. "We have a situation on board. Passengers are reporting visual anomalies outside the aircraft, requesting permission to deviate from flight path." Transatlantic 1204, clarify visual anomalies. Control, passengers are claiming to see, I don't know how to describe this, a figure outside the aircraft. Multiple passengers, independent reports. There was a long pause before air traffic control responded. Transatlantic 1204, are you declaring an emergency? Not at this time, Control. but we may need to consider an emergency landing if passenger panic escalates. Here's what makes this story particularly disturbing: the radar data. According to multiple air traffic control facilities, Flight 1204's radar signature was not alone. There was a second, unidentified object maintaining the same speed and altitude as the aircraft for over 2 hours. The object appeared on radar at exactly the same time passengers began reporting the figure outside their windows. It maintained perfect formation with the aircraft, matching every course correction and altitude change. When Flight 1204 requested emergency landing clearance at Keflavik Airport in Iceland, the unidentified radar signature vanished. The emergency landing itself was routine, but what happened next wasn't. As passengers disembarked, several of them were visibly shaken. Nicole, the nurse, required medical attention for what appeared to be acute anxiety. Reggie refused to board the connecting flight to London, choosing instead to take a ship across the Atlantic. But the most disturbing detail came from the aircraft inspection. Maintenance crews found handprints on the exterior windows of the aircraft. Massive handprints, far larger than any human hand, pressed into the metal around the window frames in rows 14, 15, and 16, exactly where passengers had reported seeing the figure. The handprints were analyzed by metallurgy experts. The impressions were made by something with immense strength, applied while the aircraft was at cruise altitude and speed. The metal deformation suggested whatever made the prints had been gripping the aircraft for an extended period. The airline quietly retired the aircraft after the incident. The official report cited structural concerns, but maintenance records show the aircraft was mechanically sound except for the unexplained damage to the window frames. Flight 1204's passenger manifest has been sealed, and crew members who worked that flight signed non-disclosure agreements. But passenger accounts continue to surface online, all describing the same impossible encounter. Whatever was outside Flight 1204 that night over the North Atlantic, it left physical evidence of its presence. And according to air traffic control records, it's not the only time unidentified objects have been tracked alongside commercial aircraft. The next time you're on a night flight, you might want to keep your window shade closed. So there you have it. 3 disturbing airplane stories that prove sometimes the most frightening experiences happen when you're trapped in a metal tube 7 miles above the ground. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. I've got more real horror accounts coming your way every week. Drop a comment below if you've had any strange experiences while flying. Trust me, after researching these stories, I'm starting to think airplane incidents are more common than we realize. Until next time, stay safe out there.